I believe there's definitely a lot of barriers for survivors accessing mainstream crisis support when they've experienced sexual violence or sexual assault. There's added layers, there's added barriers that we experience when connecting in with mainstream services. Some of them might be issues around, I don't want to bring, any shame or stigma against my community. I must be a good ambassador of queers and gender diverse people everywhere at all times. And what if they judge all of our community based on my experience? There's also issues around believability as well. Like, there's already issues within, say, our criminal justice system around believability, being a credible witness. When we bring in, particularly if it was same-sex or similar gender partner violence, as soon as that layer gets brought into it, there's all sorts of questions around, well, if I was a woman that was assaulted by another woman, will they even believe that that's rape? Or if it's between two men, it's like all those myths around, well, that's what those homos kind of deserve and they were engaging in that behaviour, what did they think would happen? And all those those myths contribute to added layers of shame and stigma, I believe, when accessing mainstream services. As sexuality and gender diverse and sex diverse people, we have, even if we're very young or very old, we've built up layers and layers of experience when interacting with the world. So whether that's when we go for a general sexual health checkup with our doctor, or we employ a new lawyer, or whenever we engage in sort of mainstream services, we already have this built up library of experiences where we're labelled as different or as other or as whatever. And so I think when you're within times of trauma, you already know kind of what's going to happen. And when all of your senses are heightened and you're feeling extra vulnerable, I think there's that feeling, or definitely in my own case, that feeling of, can I be bothered? Like, is engaging this service actually going to help me? Or is it actually going to cause me more harm? We're a very small community, and so I think there's some added layers within that when accessing crisis support. There's sort of feelings of, within this small community, we've got to look out for each other, so we've got to keep our sort of problems and issues within our community. But then when someone starts to talk about maybe an issue that they're facing, the ripple effects of that within a community, or the perceived impact that feels that will have within that community can often be a barrier to accessing services. So both the stigma and shame and discrimination that someone may face within a mainstream service, but then also the perceived impact that might have within someone's community, which, because of all that shame and discrimination that someone might face in the outside world, this community becomes, or their community becomes, really important in terms of how they live and do life. Yes, I think our community definitely fear around, particularly around talking about sexual assault and intimate partner violence. There's that fear that if we talk about this to outsiders, will this threaten some of our internal cohesion and those social supports that can be such important social bonds that help us do life with all the other discrimination and stigma we may face in other areas of our lives. There's definitely some parts of our community that I think are definitely at risk for higher levels of sexual assault. We know the data shows us that particularly queer and bisexual women have higher rates of sexual assault than their straight counterparts. And there's a whole variety of reasons that might come into play, particularly issues around corrective rape that often happens in some communities and some beliefs, within some whānau as well, and different cultural understandings of what it is to be a successful woman. We definitely know that our gender diverse communities are at higher risk of assault and misuses of power by other people in their lives, whether that's medical professionals intervening in the treatment of intersex young people, and also our gender diverse communities who are at higher risk of assault. It's really important for our communities when we access mainstream services, whether they be crisis support, medical or criminal justice, that our identities are firstly just seen, that they're believed and that they're held. I always say that, when our doctors and our other support workers in our lives often know more things about us than even some of our best friends. So that when we trust people with that information, that needs to be held in a really safe way. For many people, confidentiality is really important around that identity stuff. So really important for support workers and anyone supporting our community that they know who it's okay for that identity to be known about, and also that our identities aren't seen as a barrier to accessing that service, so that assumptions won't be made around our gender identity, assumptions won't be made around our sexual practice, and assumptions won't be made around what our body looks like or what we would like our body to look like when accessing those services. So those people who are doing intakes with us ask us in a really sensitive way, and don't make assumptions about which parts we call our bodies, who may have perpetrated the violence against us, and what we would like to do about that, or what that means for us. Mm-hmm. For our communities, it's really important that those who are there to meet our needs have enough cultural competency around what it means for us to hold the identities that we do, so that they can safely meet our needs in a time of real trauma, so that we're not having to be the person that educates our doctor on what the needs of bisexual women are, or what gender transition related healthcare might look like for a gender diverse person, so that our doctors can be there to meet our needs, and so that they're not going to be people who actually cause us more harm in a time of real vulnerability. For the crisis support worker, there's such a key pivotal person and place of support for anyone going through that system. And I believe it's really important that that person takes the time to get to know who the person is in front of them, and that works for every culture and every identity, and particularly for our communities. Things that are really important are knowing, does this person have a preferred name that they'd like you to use within the service? It might not be the name that's on their NHI number or their health insurance form or anything like that. Are there preferred pronouns that they'd like to be used and called within the service? Are there particular any sexual health or identity related supports that this person might need within the service? What are the confidentiality bonds around that? And is that identity, are there some specific needs around that identity as they interact with this service? That crisis support work is a really important role for anyone, working their way through that system. Particularly for our communities, there are some specific needs we might have. Firstly, we need to know if it's safe to be able to share our identity with that person. And often for us in other environments, sharing that part of ourselves comes with a lot of work and education. So it's really great if that person's done some rainbow cultural competency training, and if they're able to signify to us if they are a safe person for us to talk about those things. So having signs and symbols available in their waiting rooms, or language that meets our needs when they're doing our intake. So asking us things like, oh, I've noticed that your NHI number, and I've got all your details here. Is there a preferred name that you'd like when using the service or when we call you? And if we leave a message for you, is it okay for us to leave that name, or would you like us to use another name when we talk to your doctor or your whānau? Is there a preferred pronoun that you'd have with it that you'd like us to use within the service? Are there any particular sexual health needs or other identity related needs that you might have when interacting with this service? Are there any particular historical knowledge you'd like us to know about your experiences that would help us when best supporting you? So really role modelling that you as that crisis support worker are a safe person to talk to about those things. And if for whatever reason, as a crisis support worker, you don't really feel safe and competent talking about rainbow diversity stuff, signifying to that person who else within that service might be a really good and safe person to talk to about those things. If these things are new for you to be talking about, making sure that you're getting appropriate supervision from people who can support you to learn more about our communities, so that the person in crisis doesn't have to do that work for you, and that you're able to provide them with what they need in that service. Some of the particular needs of our community come down to some of the myths that our community experience and some of the stigma that they experience in sort of accessing services. Some of the particular needs that our community face relate to some of our different identities. We're a very complex and very diverse community, so yeah, I'd like to speak to some of those different identities and some of the different specific barriers that parts of our community experiencing when accessing support. We were talking earlier about the experience of those in our community who use apps and engaging in kind of hookup culture. And yeah, just really want to emphasise to support workers, to doctors, to the legal system, and everyone supporting someone who's experienced an assault. Just because someone may have met someone online and gone to meet up to hook up, they consented to a hookup, not to an assault. That even if an assault happens after using one of these apps or online services, that's still assault, and because that person was using that service doesn't mean that they were asking for it. Another myth that many in our community experience, both language within our community but also reinforced through mainstream services, is the experience of women talking about and reporting sexual assault that may or may not have involved penetrative sex or penetrative assault. That when one woman assaults another woman, that is assault no matter how it happened, and that's not okay, and that person deserves all of the support and all of the services that they may need to heal and recover from that. Another really important myth and barrier to break down when our community are accessing support is the way that the medical system and the way that those who are supporting us, whether that's a crisis worker or someone else, the way that they interact with our bodies and the assumption that are made about our bodies when we, whether that's assessing a forensic medical exam or within counselling later on talking about our bodies. So we always recommend that people reflect the language that we use about our bodies. I might call this part of my body my chest. I might also call this part about my body my breasts. But I would like the opportunity to let someone know what I call that part of my body, rather than someone saying, when this happened to your breasts, da 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 da. Like, I would like the opportunity to reflect what I want to be, what I want my body to be labelled as. Another really important part about our bodies is when forensic medical, dealing with our bodies, and counsellors are talking about our bodies later on, or someone's writing, a police might be writing something in our case files, really reflecting the language we use about our bodies, but also not using parts of our bodies as freak show kind of detail in our files or when talking to other professionals about our case. So whether that be that parts of our bodies, they weren't expecting them to look a certain way, so whether that be that we are intersex or that we are gender diverse or that we have started a gender transition or we have moved towards a gender affirming healthcare. There's a lot of myths out there about our community, particularly as the places that our community intersect with particular sexual practice or sexual experiences or kinks or desires. And I guess I just really want to emphasise that no matter what behaviour someone may be engaging in consensually, as soon as it crosses the line into them not feeling safe and unconsensual, then that is assault, and that person may want to access support around that, whether that's going down a legal medical route or social psychological support. So someone may start out engaging in a practice that all sorts of professionals might bring all sorts of stigma and discrimination against, so particularly within some fetish communities and within some kink dynamics. But I just really want to emphasise that that's that person's consensual right to do whatever they want with other people who are engaging consensually in those acts. But as soon as that crosses that line into that person withdrawing their consent, then that's when it's not okay, and then that's when it's the job of the professionals who are there to support that person to step in, not any time earlier to bring any shame or stigma or discrimination as to what that person may be engaging in consensually. It's as soon as it crosses into non-consensual, that's when support services are there to engage and support that person. Because ideally, we want to support that person to be able to step back into a life of healthy sexual engagements that feels really good for them, that feels hot, that feels exciting, and that's where they want to go. and it's not up to any professional supporting that person to bring any judgment onto what healthy sexual behaviours are around that stuff. As long as everyone is of age and is consenting, that's when it's cool.